there, this is Laure Ferlita from Imaginary Trips, and here in North America it is summertime and it is extraordinarily hot this particular summer, and I think maybe that makes the fresh fruit that's in right now seem that much sweeter, especially when you can bite into something nice and cool and just savor the sweetness. I recently captured some of the blueberries that are in season in my sketchbook, and someone said, "How'd you do that?" So thought maybe you would like to know too. So why don't you step in the studio with me and we will take a look at how to capture some pretty cool looking blueberries in your sketchbook. It is very tempting with all the fresh fruit that is in to capture it in our journals. And I have to say that there's two tricks really to painting blueberries and painting them well. One of them, if you note, they're kind of all the same color. There's a few light and dark spots, but they're kind of all the same color. So we need to pull out our creative license or our artistic license. And we need to play with those colors just a little bit to liven them up and make them a whole lot more fun. And the other thing, and I think this is one of the things that intimidates a number of artists, is how do you get those funky whitish spots that are on there? I call that oxidation. I'm not sure that's what it is, but I call it oxidation, and it really is quite easy if you're using a great watercolor paint. The blueberries that I painted with my M-Gram watercolor palette. And I have to tell you, if you have not tried M-Gram watercolor paints or their gouache, you're missing a treat. These are so much fun to paint with. If you look at the palette when I move it around, you can see the light glistening off from the top of all of the wells of pigment. And it's not because these are wet, they're dry. If I were to shake the palette, no water comes out, it's clean. It's because these are moist watercolors. They're made with a blackberry honey humectant, and so they don't dry to little rocks on your palette. You don't have to spritz them down with water and let them reactivate themselves. All you have to do is take the tip of your brush, drop it into a well, and that's the kind of color saturation that you get just by touching into that well. And the colors are absolutely fabulous. Now, the other thing that's really cool about using M-Gram watercolor paints is they have a whole series of violets and blues that work particularly well in creating the blackberries. Mineral violet, ultramarine violet deep, dioxazine purple, anthraquinone blue, ultramarine blue, cobalt teal. The other thing that's really cool to me is all of these are single pigments. In other words, they're not mixes. They're not made from 2 or 3 other pigments to get one color. So if I decide that I want to do some mixing, I have a better chance of not making mud because I'm starting out with single pigments. The other thing that is really nice is that a number of these have some really cool granule properties, and so when you put them together, you get a textural look without even having to do anything to build that texture. Now, I have to say, I don't have any affiliation with M-Gram watercolor paints. I don't in any way, shape, or form work with them. I just happen to love their product and think that it's something that is an absolute treat. When I go out on location and I have a brush full of water and that's all I have, the last thing I want to do is waste my water putting it onto all of the different wells, and especially if I have to move in a hurry and I've wet down all of my palette. I don't know which paints I might use or which ones I might not use. So one of the things that I've really gotten spoiled with is just being able to dip into one of those wells and go. So I've drawn 3 really quick blueberries, and they're bigger than life because I want you to be able to see what it is that I'm doing. And I think probably one of the best combinations that I have found for blueberries is to put down the anthraquinone blue and then come back and pick up the mineral violet and drop that in on top of it. Move it around, mix it on the paper, let it mix on its own if you are so inclined. And then as you begin to note that the watercolor is sinking down into the paper and the glisten is beginning to leave the paper a little bit. You want to take a tissue, just a regular old tissue, in fact probably the least expensive tissue. You do want to make sure they don't have any aloe or any kind of oil in them or lotion, because if you do, oil and water don't mix very well. And then just very lightly press down and lift some of the pigment. You begin to get that mottled look. Now it may be that you pick up a little too much pigment, and so you need to put a little bit more and just drop it back down. And you can keep playing at this as long as your paper is damp, until you kind of get that look that you're looking for. Putting down a little bit of the teal blue, picking up a little bit of the mineral violet, a little bit of the ultramarine deep, a little bit of the anthraquinone blue. Keeping an eye over on my other one so that I'm sure that it's not getting too dry on me. Pull the color around, fill in any white skips that I might have. Now my shine is beginning to leave on this side, so I'm going to come back and I'm lightly going to press, and you can begin to see that oxidation pattern, for lack of better things to call it, beginning to show up on the blueberry. Now that this one is beginning to get dry, I'm going to do the same thing. Pick up some of the color. And you can begin to see all the different shades of the colors pulling together to make this much, much more interesting than if I just painted it with a very dark purple or a very dark blue. This time I've got French ultramarine blue. Cleaning my brush, picking up a little bit of the mineral violet. Picking up a little bit of violet, putting it right along the top there. I'm sorry, the teal. Once again, taking my tissue and blotting it just a little bit so that I'm beginning to get just a little bit of texture there. And if for some reason I don't like my texture, I don't think it's dark enough, I want it darker, all I have to do is go back and repaint that area. One thing you do want to be careful of is if you blot when you've got still damp paint on your tissue and you blot it down on your paper, you'll get kind of a shadow effect. So be very careful that you use either a clean spot on your tissue or you choose to use a clean tissue. So just a real quick blot, and once again I'm beginning to get that mottled effect of the different colors. If you're not using a highly saturated paint, and I can assure you that M-Gram is definitely that, you're not going to have a very good time. It's going to be very difficult to get these effects. You want to make sure that whatever pigment you're using is giving you a full range of values. Painting this area a little bit darker so that kind of shows off the crown a little bit. Cleaning my brush, pulling the paint up closer to the stem. And again, if I'm so inclined, I can go back and do a little bit of blotting there. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in a bit of a cast shadow. Because they're a little on the cool side, I'm going to use something a little bit on the warmer side. And very quickly, I have some very fresh and tasty looking blueberries. I do hope that you will check out M-Gram watercolor paints. If you'd like to know more about them, they have just recently launched a new website, and check them out, see what you think, let me know what you think, and if you do get around to painting some blueberries, let me know. I'd love to see them. Once again, this is Laure Ferlita with Imaginary Trips. Thank you so very much for joining me.